Hello everybody, greetings from Brussels. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I would like to thank you for inviting me to contribute to today's debate. I wanted to share some thoughts before you get into your discussions. The past 6 months has been an extraordinary time for the EU's energy sector. Russia is taking active steps to manipulate our energy markets. Several member states are experiencing either a partial or total cut to gas supplies, especially countries in Central Europe. Energy is being used as a weapon by Russia, and we are seeing the impact on the markets. Energy prices are skyrocketing, and vulnerable citizens and businesses are hit the most. But Putin has made a mistake. Since the beginning of the war, we have acted in solidarity and unity, both when it comes to Ukraine and among member states. And the tactics of Russia have been a wake-up call. We are taking decisive short and long-term actions to protect our citizens, to protect Ukraine, and to remove Russian influence from our energy systems once and for all. In the short term, our main focus is this winter and the volatility on the markets. First, we have been ensuring enough gas storage for the colder months ahead. We have just passed our target ahead of schedule, as the storage levels are approximately at 85%. Last week, the Commission adopted emergency measures to address the high energy prices. A mandatory target to reduce electricity demand by at least 5% in peak hours. A temporary revenue cap on low-cost power generation. Today, gas or sometimes coal usually sets the final price for wholesale electricity. A company that produces electricity with lower costs will benefit massively from higher revenues. Consumers do not see the benefit. The EU-wide cap that we have proposed will generate funds that can be channeled to support consumers. At the same time, oil, gas and coal companies, which are also making huge unexpected profits, should be part of the effort to address the crisis. So we are also introducing the solidarity contribution from the fossil fuel sector that targets these surplus profits. With these measures, we can help ease the burden on citizens and businesses, but as you know, acting one season at a time is not enough. Therefore, we are taking a number of longer-term steps too. In May, we brought out our REPowerEU package. A central part of this strategy is creating greater diversity in our system. So far, we have stopped importing Russian coal, and we are winding down the import of Russian oil. 1 year ago, Russia was our biggest gas supplier. Now, Russia's supply of pipeline gas to the EU has drastically reduced over the past year, dropping from over 40% last year to around 9% in recent days. Moving away from Russian fossil fuels also gives us the chance to move towards other and build long-term energy partnerships with Norway, the United States, Azerbaijan, Algeria and others. In the end, the only lasting solution both to the security of supply and price challenges is a green and clean energy system. That's why renewables are the main driver of our REPowerEU strategy. Renewables are cheap, homegrown, and they make us more independent. And so, we have proposed to increase our share of renewables in the energy mix to 45% by 2030. We want to reach 320 gigawatts of newly installed solar photovoltaic by 2025, and then to almost double it again by 2030. Paving the way to get there means shifting how we do things in the sector, establishing the European Solar Rooftops Initiative, bringing forward an EU large-scale skills partnership for all renewables, and creating an EU Solar PV Industry Alliance. We are also working on permitting. Permitting is one of the biggest factors slowing down renewables projects. That's why we also released guidance on how to speed up the process before the summer. European Commission is also upping the ambition for hydrogen. Now we are aiming for 20 million tons of renewable hydrogen by the end of this decade, double our original target. The architecture that will develop and transport our renewable energy is a physical manifestation of our energy union. Joint projects reinforce our solidarity and security. We can have all the high renewables targets we want, but without building and connecting the right infrastructure, we cannot be energy secure. Building new LNG terminals is a good example of strategic infrastructure. Some of the agreed future projects include a terminal in Gdansk, expanding the Krk LNG terminal and reinforcing the Croatian grid, and launching the Greece-Bulgaria interconnector, coming online at a crucial moment for EU's energy security. Meanwhile, this year, there have been some key diversification projects, like the gas interconnector between Poland and Lithuania. Projects like these are in the front lines, helping us move away from Russian fossil fuels once and for all. Finally, we are doing our utmost for the security of our friends in Ukraine. We have coordinated the delivery of energy supplies from the EU to Ukraine, including reverse gas flows. We are backing a Ukraine Energy Support Fund for donations from EU countries and others. Whether it's fuels or equipment, this emergency support helps protect the Ukrainian energy sector. Perhaps the most significant move has been synchronizing the Ukrainian and Moldovan grids with the European continental grid. The electricity trade between the EU and Ukraine and Moldova will be now gradually increasing. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that we are facing a tough winter, but step by step, a new EU energy system is becoming a reality, one where Russian supplies have no part. Thank you, and I hope you have an excellent discussion.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this extremely timely and interesting panel about energy security in Central and Eastern Europe in the wake of the war in Ukraine. I'm Benedek Jávor, as it was mentioned. I'm the head of the representation of the city of Budapest to the EU, and I have the privilege to moderate this panel. Our distinguished panelists include Borislav Sandov, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Environment and Waters in Bulgaria. Also, he was a co-founder of the Green Movement Party in Bulgaria and participated in the government of Kirill Petkov on behalf of the Democratic Bulgaria coalition. Then we have Toby T. Gati, former special assistant to the United States President for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasian states. Also an assistant secretary of state for intelligence and research at the State Department, and actually member of the board of the decarbonization tech company of Angara Global. And last but not least, an old friend of mine, Balázs Fersman, who is actually director of the Institute of Professional Management at the Corvinus University, also works for the Regional Center for Energy and Energy Policy Research, and also former State Secretary for Infrastructure in Hungary. When we originally planned this panel earlier this year, we thought that it's an extremely important question to see how Central and Eastern European countries, which are, because of sometimes historical reasons, are much more dependent on Russian energy supply, how energy security and security of supply can be guaranteed for those countries. But we didn't think that it's becoming even much more important and crucial to discuss this issue because of the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. And this puts an especially strong pressure on those countries, which already have some special problems. So if we have a look on the European climate and energy policy history in the past few years, let's say that since launching the Green Deal initiative in 2019, but even if we look back before, the region had some specific problems, including a lower climate transition, lower share of renewable energy in most of those new member states, less investments in the renewable sector. Also, the social issues are much higher on the agenda. Perhaps a bigger share of the population has to face with energy poverty questions in the regions. That's already created a special situation for those countries. But with the Russian invasion in Ukraine, this whole story was topped with an even more urgent and burning problem, the security of supply question. And of course, as we heard from Commissioner Simpson, Europe as such is fighting with this problem. But for the Central and Eastern European countries, it's even more crucial and difficult problem how to tackle with this energy dependency on Russia, what to do with the potential or already happened cut from the Russian gas supply. So I think that while of course we have to keep our eyes on the all European solutions, and I believe that finally only European solidarity can help those countries, or that's at least my views, perhaps slightly diverging from the Hungarian government's views on that, but there is a need for a joint European solution. But still, we have to see that in the region, governments are under a special pressure of the specific circumstances in the region. So the big question is what the member states of the region can do with this situation. Is this possible to become independent from Russian energy supply, to manage cuts from the Russian gas supply, for example, as it happened in Bulgaria, in Poland, in the Baltic states, or in the case of Finland. But also there are other questions, that how can those governments or those member states manage the burning social crisis? And in the previous panel we discussed very much the issue of a socially just climate transition, but now it's not the question of a long-term socially just climate transition, it's the question of what is going to happen this winter with poverty in the region and with vulnerable households in the region. And also the question is there if those countries are able to not necessarily speed up, but at least keep the original rhythm or track for decarbonization, or there is no other way than turning back to dirty fossil fuel like coal in Poland or firewood in Hungary, for example. Is this long-term shift in energy policies, or this is just an emergency solution? So there are many questions which we should discuss in this panel. And without further ado, I would give the floor first to Mr. Sandov to give us an insight to the Bulgarian situation as a former Deputy Prime Minister and responsible for environment and climate issues. How do you see the opportunities, problems, difficulties of Bulgaria? What the new Bulgarian government is doing with this problem, and what are the perspectives?
Thank you, Benedict, and it is a pleasure for me being here with you and in this very interesting discussion and conference. We are in a very strange situation. Bulgaria being one of the Trojan horses of Russia for many years, also in European Union, as it was announced by Putin himself in 2007, especially because of the energy dependency, it is very hard because we are also facing a political crisis. We had so the elections that are coming next Sunday is the fourth in the period of 1.5 years. So you can imagine how hard it is at this moment. The Take Care government, organized by the president, who is quite passive on the geopolitical situation with the Russian war in Ukraine, is getting even harder, the situation. But I still hope that the majority of the Bulgarian population and also the political parties are going to find a solution, if not the next elections, so after the winter. But the main question here is that winter is coming, right? So winter is coming, and it looks like it will be hard for many countries because of the economic war and the fossil fuel shortages for European member states by one of the suppliers, the Russian Federation. Bulgaria has a specific role in this situation, not just because of its historical relations with Russia, and even our government collapsed mainly because of this influence. So it collapsed just after we paved the way for North Macedonia and Albania to be in the way of candidacy for European Union member states, and also it happened just after we expulsed 70 Russian diplomats because they've been spies and they didn't really act due to the international law. And after Bulgaria crashed in the stress test of Russian Federation, because we were the first with Poland on the way of agree or disagree to pay in rubles for the gas supply. So we refused to pay in rubles. We refused to change the contract that we had, but we also announced that if Russian Federation from its perspective cut the gas supplies, so we are not ready to negotiate for the next contract because the current contract for gas supply is expiring just in a few months, in the end of the year. So we are getting in a serious position and fighting for our own sovereign position as part of European Union and NATO. By the way, today is our National Independence Day, so it is a good moment to talk about independence also in the perspective of energy policies. And just a few words more about Bulgaria and the specific situation. We are 100% dependent on nuclear fuel, as many other countries in Europe. And this is not that often discussed, but this is part of the issue. We had supplies like nuclear fuel for like a year, but if this war and this situation is continuing in this way, there will be soon a serious problem with the supplies of nuclear fuel, because, as you know, it's not that easy as gas or oil to shift to another nuclear fuel. I think it's the same for Hungary and some other member states. Fortunately, we use a very small percentage of gas. We had a yearly consumption of 3 billion cubic meters of gas, which is 0.8 of the total European Union consumption. But unfortunately, almost 99% of it was imported by Russia. And now we are trying to have a diversification, which I think is coming very soon, like a week or 2 weeks, using a gas from Azerbaijan, a total amount of 1/3 of our consumption. By the way, our consumption is 1/3 of the consumption of Hungary, which means that we are not that much dependent on gas. Only 2% of the households are gasified, which is something good that we've been late, like the usual European process of gasification of households. So this defect is now an effect, a positive effect, I mean, in this perspective. So we don't need to gasify the households. And for the oil, it's like 80%. It was like 80%. Now it's like 60% of the total consumption of oil. We have a big. It's the most developed network for LPG. By the way, this is very interesting topic for many of you probably. LPG is a gas, but not a fossil gas that is directly got from the ground, but it is a side product of raffinery of producing oil products. So due to the economic benefits, many people in Bulgaria drive their cars on LPG. So now it is so cheap to use this as a fuel for the cars. It's like very, very cheap because it's a side product. So this network of LPG could be used and replaced some of the supplies for some sectors. 1/3 of the consumption is the district heating station of the capital city of Sofia. And here I'm just opening a break, and I'll finish with this. Because we have so many solutions, and in short term, it will be a climate-intensive winter. I mean, not climate-intensive, I mean intensive for fossil fuels, because we will burn more wood and coal and et cetera, and Bulgaria is still a net electricity exporter, so we are producing a lot of energy by coal, for example, and we are exporting it, which will probably maintain because of the gas shortages. But so in short term, this is bad for the climate this winter. But I think in the long term, it is good because we now realize that bridge fuel or transition fuel as gas was a big mistake. We as Greens have been always repeating that we should directly jump to the renewable energy sources. And now it is obvious that we have all the technologies, we have all the potential, and et cetera, et cetera. And just mentioning, and this is my last sentence, Sofia, the district heating system of Sofia, consuming 1/3 of the gas supply. This city was found 4,000 years ago because of the hot mineral water that erupting there. And it is still just a fontaine there. We are not using this potential. Even during the Roman Empire, there were some baths. Now they're not even a baths. I mean, it's just fontaine, hot mineral water. So Sofia, as a region which consumes 1/3 of the gas, could be easily shifted to a geothermal 2.0, for example, these new technologies, or solar heating systems, or any other renewable energy source solutions. The other 1/3 could be now, because of the diversification and using Azerbaijan gas, and the other 1/3 could be savings, biogas, and other alternatives. So for Bulgaria, it's not that big issue because of this, but of course, this winter, it will be hard.
Thank you very much, and I think that you touched very important points. What could be the alternatives? Of course, there is a difference on the short term and on the long term, and the problems and the perspectives might be completely different. What kind of solutions can help us for the next winter, and what should be the direction on the long run? Also, you mentioned some other alternatives like gas from Azerbaijan, so the diversification of sources, it's important. You mentioned, and it's very important to talk about because there is not too much discussions on the European level about nuclear energy and the nuclear dependency on Russia, which is not only related to fuel supply of Kozloduy in Bulgaria or in Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, or Finland, the Russian-built nuclear power plants, but also, and perhaps this is not very much known, the French nuclear industry uses in a high share uranium mined in Kazakhstan and processed in Russia. So the whole European nuclear industry is highly dependent on Russia, and this is something we are not tackling for the moment. But also there is another other issue that when we discuss those questions, normally we talk about the member states of the region and the European level. In the previous panel, there were talks about the cities, the role of the city is very important. But there is an additional player, the United States, which of course has its own geopolitical interests and goals, also business interests. And when we come to the alternatives, what Europe is looking for now, LNG, coming from Qatar, coming from Algeria, but mainly, or in a big share, coming from the United States. So I think that it's not only about President Biden's pressure on Putin to end the war, but the United States have much more to do and much more interest and influence in the region how to deal with this whole situation. So I would like to ask you, Ms. Gatti, to give us a little bit of insight how the US looks on the region and those energy security, security of supply questions in the region. For the moment, what are the historical tracks and approaches of the United States in the region, and how do you see the potential ways out?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be back in Budapest. Jó napot kívánok, for those of you speaking. I hope my accent wasn't too terrible. Obviously, it's crucial to talk about energy security now, and I do want to focus on U.S. policy. And U.S. policy has evolved in two directions. One is towards Europe and towards Russia, and the other is energy policy, where the United States has, for the first time, really tackled the question of what the future is going to look like. And it's been a major accomplishment for our Congress to do anything. So I can talk about that. But first I want to spend 1 minute on talking about how we got where we are, because it seems to me, and this will be, I guess, giving you some of the American interpretation, that the European interest in security of supply was matched perfectly by the Russian interest in money and in gaining funds from the sale of oil and gas. And so it was a mutual dependency, not always accepted by all members of the EU. We know this. Many of them were very skeptical, and those that were most skeptical are in the best position now, actually, to deal with the crisis, because they believed that it was never a secure relationship to rely on the Russians in that way. But there was that whole belief in a Europe whole and free for a long time. And just saying those words today is very sad, because there's nothing about Europe that's whole and free now, or at peace. So, so then I come to America's policy towards Russia and towards Putin. I was in the Clinton administration. We spent a lot of time believing that it was important to help Russia and give Russia a chance. And I believe we did get Russia a chance. And as we say in America, Russia blew it. Putin's has made several miscalculations. I think the first is to believe that Russia was stronger than it is. And we see this not just in energy policy, we see this in military policy. If you're a country in the third world, do you want to buy Russian arms? Do you want your military to be supplied by the weapons that don't seem to work that well? the second thing is his miscalculation was that the West was divided more than it was. And that's a perfectly normal calculation. I mean, anyone who looks at American politics would think our country has gone crazy in terms of our politics, and you would be half right. But that means we're half sane, in addition to half crazy. So there is something there. And so these are geopolitical and personal miscalculations on the part of Russia and Putin. But I'm not here to give you a history lesson. The reason I do that is because we are going to enter a period, and nobody has talked about this, and I'm very surprised, where we are not going to be dependent on fossil fuels, but we are going to be dependent on rare earth minerals. Rare earth minerals, what are those? Lithium, cobalt, copper. Without those, you don't have a next stage in the energy revolution. And very few countries control these. Some very unstable African countries. And guess who has been thinking about this for years? China. And I mentioned this because an ascendant China for the United States was much more important in foreign policy and in considerations than a struggling Russia or an aggressive Russia until the Ukraine war. So that's really important to keep in mind, the perspective of America. Now I want to deal with two questions relating just to Russia. The first is the extension of the energy war to the nuclear power area. And as you mentioned, this is getting more and more attention. But the weaponization, and I use that word very carefully chosen, of nuclear reactors. The attack, why did this happen? Well, one of the reasons is because they could, and the Russians are very good at doing things just because they can. But it's also because Ukraine is a net exporter of electricity. Who does it export that electricity to? Europe. So again, you have a strategy aimed much more at Europe than at Ukraine, if you think about it at the beginning. Of course, now it's aimed at Ukraine, but at the beginning it wasn't. It was part of an energy strategy. What I want to say is that we are in uncharted territory. Never before has a nuclear plant been used as a military base. And this is even clearer, not from Zaporizhzhia so much as the attack that took place 3 days ago. Within 900 feet, a Russian missile came of destroying the connections, not blowing up the plant. This isn't Chernobyl. Don't think that analogy, that's not it. Of making that plant close down. And of course, once the electricity and the cooling systems don't work, which is the most important part of the system, the plant won't work. So, and think about this. If there's a referendum that the Russians want to hold, that nuclear plant will now be part of Russia. It won't be Ukrainian anymore, according to the Russians. I understand the Ukrainians don't accept that. So there is a continuum here in the Russian thinking about energy sources. And one of the great threats to me is a nuclear plant as a dirty bomb. It's a dirty bomb, that's what it is. So we're focusing, we have like thousands in America of specialists who talk about strategic, tactical, weapons. No, just blow up a nuclear plant. That's all you have to do. And you've destroyed much more than the area around that. So, and Russians have talked about this. Some of the Russian military people have talked about it as if it were a game of chess. You know, take this move, take that move, and with no consideration of the impact. So what does this all mean? And again, you've mentioned this question. A lot of Europe relies on Russian nuclear fuel. Only Russian nuclear fuel. Stop thinking about LNG, for God's sakes. LNG comes from a lot of places. America's not going to cut off your LNG. There are a lot of people in America who all they want to do is sell stuff. They don't want to cut off your LNG. That's not what's happening. But Rosatom has a monopoly on Russian nuclear fuel. They also have 20 to 25 new plants being built at a cost of about $100 billion. And these countries, and it's Bulgaria, it's Slovakia, Turkey, the Finns said, no, thank you, we don't want to do it anymore, the Czech Republic, but others are going to be totally dependent on Rosatom, which is not a military institution anymore. It used to be, it was cut in half, you probably know that. And the arguments are, and this will sound very familiar, they just want to have commercial deals, and they'll make a contract, and of course they'll abide by the contract because they always do. Well, they always do till they don't. That's very important. It's even interesting, ironically, that America is dependent on Russian nuclear fuel for 16% of its nuclear plants, which most people don't know, and I think if people knew that in America, that every time they turn on their light bulb, 1/5 of it is from Russian nuclear fuel, they wouldn't be happy. But let me focus on Hungary for 1 second, because in Hungary, you have a particularly interesting situation with the Paks nuclear plant. Here you have a fact that 6 months after the invasion of Ukraine, 6 months, the Hungarian government issued a permit to expand the Paks plant. Not before, to say, oh, we didn't know. They know. And the terms of the contract are sealed, and they will be for 30 years. So if you want to know if there's an escalation clause, if the nuclear fuel is going to be continued, or how much the Russians gave as a loan, you're out of luck. I mean, you can go ask some people here, but I don't think they're going to give you answers. So the question is, how can reliance be on this fuel be reduced? Because as was mentioned before, you just can't substitute fuel. You just can't. My second question has to do with the global climate agenda. Now, we heard a lot this morning, and I've listened to many of these discussions. Nobody ever mentions Russia. Did you hear that? I mean, they're talking about policy, and it's all EU, as if you could do this by yourself, and you don't have to worry about what Russia is doing. Well, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what Russia's global climate policy was, and it used to be very easy because they didn't have one. So whatever you said was just as good as what someone else said. Well, then they started to develop a policy, and Putin made a statement about this. And people started saying, hey, Russia cares. Well, why does Russia care? Because everyone else cares, so you have to be part of the club and you have to care. And so he had some advisors who probably said, here's some ideas, and fine. Okay, the Russian government did not focus on these issues at all. Actually, I was at a meeting, I heard Chubais talk about this, and he said that if you didn't care about climate policy as a company, you would go out of business. And if you didn't care about climate policy as a country, you would be a third world country. Now, what do you think he had in mind? And you know where he is now. Anyway, I used to sit on the board of a Russian oil company. And I know that sounds terrible, and if you're a climate person, please still talk to me. But I was the one in charge of sustainability, and I was the first woman on the board, so that should give me some points in your mind. We used to talk about sustainability all the time. They cared. They had to care. Why? Because no Western bank would give them any loans unless they cared. Nobody would buy their stock unless they cared. So they really did care. And they built redundancies into their pipeline systems. They even cleaned up what they called pre-privatization waste, which you, of course, don't know what that means. I didn't either. What it means is the Soviet Union left them a mess. And for 25 years, they've been cleaning it up, and they're still not done. So you can imagine what the mess was. So now it's much less important to have these ties. The stock is frozen, you can't get loans, you can't do anything. So who in Russia is going to care about this? Now, they will care when COP27 takes place because someone has to make a speech, right? Which is always a good idea. I was in government. When someone has to make a speech, that's a great way to make policy. But they really don't care very much. And you could see this by the fact that when they cut off the energy to Europe, they had to flare the natural gas or have methane come. Why? Because they don't have in Russia enough storage facilities. They were selling, they weren't storing. So the whole policy is very strange. The Arctic Council, very important, hasn't met for 6 months. And you have several new reports from Finland, one saying that the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. And as you know, most of the pipelines go through it. So I can either stop here or talk about U.S. policy for 3 minutes. What do you want?
3 minutes.
Okay. Okay. The U.S. is not Europe, in case you hadn't noticed. We don't pass the same kind of laws. We don't use the same language you use in talking about climate. It took years to get a climate bill, and the only way we got it was by using a provision of U.S. law that allows you to get a bill passed with 50 votes in the Senate. And so the bill isn't called an energy bill, it's called an Inflation Reduction Act. How would you know it's about energy? But it is. It doesn't empower the federal government. I was just listening to all the talk about, you know, the EU and all this. We couldn't care, I mean, most people couldn't care less what the federal government was doing. What they really care is what their local and state governments are doing, which may be better. And we have fewer penalties. We don't have carbon taxes, and we never will, because Americans don't like to be told what to do by anybody, which is not always a good thing. But not a single Republican voted for the energy bill that was just passed, either in the House or the Senate. Not a single Republican in the Senate or House of Representatives. Texas is boycotting any investment firm that talks about ESG. They don't want the banks to invest because they don't believe in it. That's the governor of Texas. He could run for president, that Republican ticket next time. In Florida, they're suing the accounting firms for reporting on what they call unrelated social matters, which is climate change. In Kentucky, the governor looked around at the floods and said, I don't understand why this is happening. Okay? If you want someone to understand why this is happening, go north or go to California. They understand what's happening. So the bill we passed is a bill full of carrots, meaning money. Money to the states, to the cities, $370 billion, which even in America is a lot of money. Tax credits, development of carbon removal industries, aid, and, of course, in America, because we have trade-offs, aid to the fossil fuel industry. I don't think that's a terrible thing, by the way, depending on what they give that aid for. As was mentioned, I'm on the board of a decarbonization company, and that company is taking is trying to clean up the carbon that comes out of the fuel, the process of in the pipelines, and save fuel doing it because they won't have to heat the fuel, and also cut carbon by 30%. And so we have to do everything at this point. We can't just ignore fossil fuel in America. Somebody once said, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. And the oil and gas age isn't going to end when we run out of oil and gas. So that's my comment on the United States. My final word is, it's a really dangerous day today, really dangerous. Internationally, within Russia, the protests have started again. The arrests have started again. India is criticizing Russia. Wow. China is criticizing Russia, not out loud. A weakened Russia, you know, is always not so great. We keep talking about winter. Remember what the Russians always say when someone invades Russia. We hope it's winter. Well, what if the Russians, where are the Russians going to be this winter? In Ukraine. So they're going to be on the other end of invading another country. We'll see what happens. And just remember this, and this is the American policymaker speaking. A weakened Russia is a gift to China. China is seen as the US's main long-term rival. not Russia. Not Russia. And it is a gift to China to have the Russian pipelines go the other way. And I would mention also that the fact that you're filling your tanks in Europe with natural gas is because that Russian gas is being sold to China, which is reselling it to Europe. So while you pat yourself on the back, just remember who's benefiting from some of this. So thank you very much. I hope I've raised some questions that are of interest to you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask Balázs, of course, some Hungarian specificities were already touched in the previous discussion, but still I would like to ask you to explain a little bit more in details how Hungary, or what is the situation of Hungary in this whole context? What is really special for Hungary? Is it different from other regional countries? What can we do? And also to talk a little bit about the European level, because of course it was always mentioned that Europe should do, but still there is a lot of initiative on the European level. We are not sure how effective they are in fact, and what is going to happen, and we had a short discussion before this panel, what is going to happen with the European climate ambitions and targets? Is it railed out by this war, or we can still go back, or even speeding it up? So how it looks like on the long run?
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to this really very inspiring discussion. So lots of interesting thoughts on the table now, so it's not easy to react all of them, but now I'd like to go back as a first to the introductory speech of Commissioner Simpson, because she mentioned, I think, a lot of facts which I think it's very interesting from our discussion's perspective. So originally, this Repower EU plan's idea was to have the European economy after the COVID crisis as a stimulus. And as we realized, because of this price crisis at the beginning of the natural gas markets, which began half year before of the war, it's very important that not at the time of the war, but in the summer of 2021, when its significant increase began the gas markets, practically caused a situation when the European decision makers realized that now this is the most urgent task to manage, how to face with this unbelievably high increase on the energy prices. Of course, this shock continued as the war began. And practically, I think, you know, it's not easy to predict something, but I think we somehow have seen the top of these prices at the end of this summer. And I will tell you why I think that this was somewhere on the top of this. We have heard some facts about the current filling level of the European gas storages, which were, I think, one of the immediate measures that Europe decided after realizing that we are in a big trouble. And you know that for now, this means that we have 86% filling ratio in average in the European gas storages. Well, it's an interesting fact, but what does it mean? So you know that. But the most interesting is that it's approximately 1,000 terawatt-hour gas in the storages, and the overall European consumption of natural gas is approximately 4,000 terawatt-hour gas in a normal year, which we never have seen again. And it's very important that it was the European level of gas consumption before this crisis. And that's why I think it's very important to understand, okay, as we realize that we are in a big trouble, what to do? The first is somehow to manage the urgent security issue, and I think that this storage obligation was the best available tool to do it. Europe managed it. For now, our storages are full. It was a huge cash out, but for now, this is a sunk cost. We did it. We have. Second, manage the flows, because this is the stock, we need to manage the flow. The good news, if we see the current flows to Europe, all other suppliers of Europe increased their export to Europe, including US with the LNG, including the pipeline exporters, Norway, Algeria, Azerbaijan, other LNG suppliers as well, and also the European own production increased of natural gas. So, but we also have heard from Commissioner Simpson that for now, the pre-crisis share of Russian export to Europe, which was approximately 40% of the total European import, decreased below 10%. She mentioned, I think, 9%. We checked, it's at 7, but it's 7, 9. So it's very good news that it's a totally different bargaining power compared to the 40% market share. But I personally believe that Russian share in the European gas import will never again 40%. And it's a very important shift because, yes, this is a weapon. This is an energy weapon. And yes, for a decade, Europe thought that we can manage this twofold independency with Russia. We are independent from them because of the gas import, and they are independent from us because of the money. So that was more or less the deal. There was one crucial element of this deal, that we needed a trust that that Russia is a trusted supplier of natural gas. And I think that in the last 1 year, it's totally have changed. And it's a crucial element of the new gas market. Another crucial change that we could see, and this not became on the last 1 year, it was the evolution of the last decade, that the natural gas is more and more a commodity product, a global commodity product. It's not a European product, not a US product, not a Chinese product. This is a global product. And that's very interesting to understand the LNG markets. So in case of the LNG markets, there is always a global competition of the different opportunities how to use the natural gas and what is the price level of the natural gas. And Europe is always in a competition with Japan, with China, for these gases. From one side is a bad news because it's increased the demand for LNG, but on the other side it's also can increase the stability of this market because of the more and more suppliers. As you mentioned, Ms. Gatti, that that doesn't have any meaning that US cut the LNGs because there are lots of exporters. There are more and more companies who are active in these markets. So this part of the gas market, I think, had a revolutionary change in the last decade, and it will remain. And I mentioned that this 4,000 terawatt-hour gas consumption will significantly change in the future. And because the one task is, of course, manage these flows, increase the import from other sources, but the other is that manage the demand side for natural gas. And the question is, now, I think, is much more on the demand side. The good news that if we see on short term the current situation with the current filling rate of the storages, I think that for now, this winter is much more a price issue rather than a security of supply issue. But it's a huge price issue, which will stimulate immediate adaptation in each part of the economy. What we see now. What happens? Well, if we see the typical type of consumption of natural gas, approximately 1/4 used for producing electricity, another 1/4 for using by the industry, and the half of it using by heating, mainly the households. It's a big difference in Bulgaria and in other countries. I know that your country is not so gasified as like ours, but if, for example, I see the Hungarian statistics, this is more or less the share of using the natural gas. Well, these three main sectors, three different paths of potential adaptation. In case of households, it's very interesting. I have seen the Hungarian statistics. After the liberalization of the gas markets in 2007, it stimulated an immediate decrease of using the natural gas by the households. Why? Because in 2007, we introduced market prices for natural gas, which practically had an impact on the decrease of using natural gas for heating purposes by the households. And this continuous decrease of using the per capita usage of natural gas happened from 2007 until 2013. Maybe it can be a good quiz what happened in 2013 in Hungary, but the Hungarian knows that it was the famous year of, in Hungary, a rezsicsökkentés, the price cut or the price regulation of the household prices. And from that time, there is a continuous increase again of the household consumption of natural gas, despite the fact I checked the average temperature in these years. The average temperature did not decrease because the only logical reason to increase your consumption is that if there is a colder year, of course, you need more energy for heating. So now the level of the last year gas consumption by the households of Hungary per household was higher than any other year from the year of liberalization of the gas markets. And I think that as our households could adapt earlier to the price signals from the market, now as the Hungarian regime have changed and now over the average you need to pay a market price, it will create an immediate adaptation in the households and it will reduce again. This is the household sector. Another challenging part of the heating energy usage is the public buildings and the services. Well, this is really a painful adaptation, and we see in every day now that this swimming pool will close, this library will close, this theater will close. Factually, this is the realistic adaptation on short term, I think. It's really painful, but I think we need to do. So if we focus now on the short-term opportunities, how we can reduce our demand, we really need to assess which part of services we need for the acceptable life and which are the so-called extras. So I hope you will not misunderstand me. Of course, I like very much to go to theaters and swimming pools as well, but I think I'm ready to accept for a short period to reduce this type of demand. This is the second in the heating sector. The third is the industry. So I think in case of industry, the adaptation is much more challenging because the technology shift is not from one day to the other. So it needs to make a distinction on the short-term adaptation and on the long-term adaptation. In short term, I think, unfortunately, the only adaptation, but for example, we see now in the European fertilizer industry that over 2/3 of the fertilizing producer companies have closed. Why? It's a typical market adaptation. They realize that on the current level of gas prices, their end product, the fertilizer product, will be so costly, so high price, that the farmers will not buy it. It will cause, otherwise, a lot of problem on next years because it will reduce the quantity of produced agricultural products on the lands, and it will have a lot of question marks. But if we see from energy security perspective, this short-term adaptation in the industry also decrease the demand for natural gas. In our model, what my colleagues now made a new model around with our European gas model, we see that the new equilibrium at the European market maybe will somewhere at 3,000 terawatt-hour gas consumption against of the 4,000 terawatt-hour yearly consumption before this crisis. And this is 25%. And if you see this supply management, what EU did, more or less they reduced the Russian import approximately to that level. So if we successful with the demand side reactions or demand side adaptation, it will be again balanced. This is not good news, so I don't want to misunderstand me, because as I told you, it's painful and it will have a lot of medium long-term impacts as well. But factually, as I feel that now this is manageable. Not easily, but manageable. And I don't want to be too long, because I think I hope there will be lots of questions to us, and there are some other interesting topics, but you asked me about the Hungarian specifics. So I think that we need to see at first that, and I think that was the problem, that was the solidarity issue in European level, that for a long term, Europe have seen the gas problems as a regional problem and not an EU level problem. I remember when I worked for the state administration, and I was in Brussels, and we argued for a higher level of storages in European level. Practically, there was no interest. Why? Because if you share the Russian gas, for example, in the gas import of France, it's zero. They have gas import, but from other sources. If you go to east, the percentage of Russian gas is more and more, the pipeline gases. And therefore, I understand that the position of these countries, like Hungary, is different from others who can manage easier this shift from the Russian gas to other. Otherwise, it's very interesting if you compare to different political communication strategies of our regional countries. Well, for example, only compare Hungary to Czech Republic. Czech Republic is communicated, as I see, very strongly against of Russia in this conflict. And Hungary is more friendly to Russia. But if you check the current status of the storage filling in the two countries, it's more or less the same. So from energy policy perspective, they did the same. They stored over 40% of the yearly consumption of Czech Republic and also in Hungary. So we are above the European average, which now is 25%. So the yearly consumption of Hungary is secured with 40% with the current amount of stored gas in the Hungarian storages. But the same I have seen in Czech Republic or in Slovakia or in Austria. So everybody did the same, factually. Last question about the impact on the energy transition. I think that from one side, this is the best thing that could happen, that the prices are high. Because these high prices immediately stimulated lots of investments to the renewables, which companies thought about, but well, they calculated, they thought, oh, I have better ideas. This MPV is not so good. Now all the MPVs are excellently good. So everybody would like to build on-site production fields, solar park, and so on, and manage somehow this. This is the good news. And I think that it's good news not only on short term, but it's good news on long term. Because as they do this investment, they will not shift back to the natural gas. So it will be a one-way direction. And this is the good news. There are some not so good stories. As you have mentioned, this burning now the biomass, or in some countries the coal. I really hope that this will be only a limited part of the short-term adaptation. And this is like a result of the risk assessment that now the most important is to reduce the Russian share. Yeah, in very short term, and I'd like to in very short term, maybe we can accept some fossil solution for it, with the hope that this will be only interim solutions. I don't see any technology investment to the fossils. What I see is that the utilization of the currently existing fossil-based capacities, again, but not to be a new. And it's very important, I think, that this make this distinction. So I hope that it will be, on longer term, a good news for our energy transition to the renewables.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, the time is more or less up. Still, I would make a very short round of short questions, short answers. To continue where Balázs just finished, that how do you see, Borislav, the situation in Bulgaria? Do you expect that this shock, the energy price shock, which started before the war, but it was even aggravated with the war, can help Bulgaria on the long run to create a new equilibrium, becoming more independent from external sources, from Russia, and to move ahead to speed up the energy transition, the climate transition? Or you believe that that the solutions finally, which originally are planned to be perhaps interim or just for a short period of time, but they somehow will kept alive and can reel out the energy transition of the country?
I don't think the winter will be tough. Starting positively, it will be a little bit hot, but not tough. We have enough in the storage, a diversification of supplies, some measures for energy savings, etc. Definitely not going to be so hard as it is predicted. But indeed, European solidarity has to play a better role. Honestly speaking, in the first months of the war, there was no European solidarity. Every and each country negotiate by themselves with different suppliers like US and Middle East countries, etc., etc. So this war, economic war on energy sources or physical war in Ukraine will definitely be a positive effect for the democracy in Bulgaria and in the Central and Eastern Europe, because less influenced by Russia through the European, through the energy policies, etc., mean less corruption, mean more democracy, like liberal democracy, not illiberal democracy. And it will be for good in the perspectives of energy transition. And here it is very important not to take some false solutions, like getting in a long-term contract on the same amount of gas with some other states, especially some other authoritarian states, because there are such which supply fossil fuels. And on the third phase, for the market, we will have more contributors, more prosumers on the market, which is for good, that's for sure. Indeed, like now to invest in solar, for example, in photovoltaics, it is kind of the best investments you can ever done, you can ever made. Like in a period of 3 years, you can get back your investment, and this is wow for the business, for the market. The winter will be warmer because of the climate change. So this negative effect will have some positive effect on the consumption. We also have to tackle two other issues. Geopolitically, because of the mobilization of Russian army, it's not sure how they decide to react. For example, their small neighbor Azerbaijan, if they supply more and more with gas, they could decide, like the craziest guy Putin could decide to attack them. I don't know, because of this. And then Turkey has a major role in all this, not just because they are allies with Azerbaijan, but also because they are allies with, I mean, they don't have moral barriers there, and Erdogan is playing just the same as Putin, just he has not that much power, and he's still a NATO member. But the Turkish stream, which in Bulgaria is called the Balkan Stream, which de facto transit the gas, the Russian gas, to Hungary, but also Serbia, which together with Bulgaria are the closest allies of Putin in Central and Eastern Europe. I do not expect that Bulgaria could cut this pipeline supplies. I'm not sure what happened with the decision or the proposal to cut some of the supplies to Austria through Hungary. Just on the last European Environmental Ministers' Council, that there was such news. I'm not sure what happened, but it is very absurd. So Russia cut off the gas supplies to Bulgaria, but we still transit all this gas through Bulgaria in a with a pipeline that was built in 1 year period of time with a lot of violations. We had a special committee that investigated and found so many violations of the European legislation and some other legislations for 1 year with our money, by the way, with our national money. We built this pipeline that now transit gas, Russian gas, to some other states, but we are cut off of Russian gas supplies. But so this is also an issue because this gas is coming from Turkey. I mean, Turkey. So Turkey has a role in all this, also because of Bosphorus and Black Sea. There are so many topics to be mentioned in the geopolitical, from the geopolitical point of view when we are talking about energy and war and in the perspective of war. But also I see that some other false solutions are on the ground. Maybe there will be new discussion on fracking, even though that almost all European states officially ban now because of the these political talks and this situation of negotiations with different stakeholders in the sector. Probably there will be again discussion on permitting on or ban fracking in different member states. So yeah, for Bulgaria there will be no problem. We have exporting electricity which compensate the higher prices on gas, because the higher prices on electricity now is tremendous, and we have some national companies that are selling this and producing and selling. So it's not going to be a problem for us. Turning back to the beginning, I think, of course, counting all the casualties and the negative effects and all the risks because of the Zaporozhye and nuclear issues, from the perspective of energy transition, democracy and independence, this move of Putin is for good. Bulgaria, I mean, in a long-term perspective. In a short-term perspective, I said there will be no phasing out of coal because of this situation. So from the carbon perspective, it will be a carbon-intensive winter, which is definitely a problem for the climate. But in the mid-term and long-term, it will just boost the energy transition to renewables.
Yeah, just really what is left is just one sentence question, two sentence answer. To Ms. Gatti, you mentioned a lot nuclear energy. How do you see with the new risks you mentioned, but also with the new pressures to produce additional energy and electricity in Europe? How do you see the perspectives of nuclear energy in Europe? Is it going to become a new nuclear renaissance, or the new risks and other problems with and the Russian dependency on nuclear fuel could even put a further pressure on the phase out of nuclear energy in Europe?
I don't know as much about I don't know as much about the European situation. I know some countries use nuclear energy and they're very happy with it, and they're not about to give it up. people's minds are stuck on Chernobyl and other Fukushima and stuff like that, but that's not where the nuclear energy industry is, and they're developing, I don't want to say portable reactors, but much smaller ones that can be used. Governments would have to be very vigilant on whether these are safe or not. But what we've seen is that gas isn't safe. Give me a break. I mean, this whole experience tells you that you can import natural gas and your countries can go into crisis. So I think we have to put nuclear energy in perspective. I'm not crazy about it. I don't want a reactor in my backyard, as everybody says in America. But I think there are places, certainly in the United States, a big country, where this could be used. But if solar and other forms of renewables are so much cheaper, then the only way you're going to get nuclear plants is if the governments back them. So as citizens, I think we can all play a role in whether the government is going to provide, which would be billions and billions of dollars, not just in building them, but in guarantees if there was an accident of some sort. So I think that it really, it's still a story that's unfolding. But we have to remember that no form of energy now can't be weaponized. And that's really a problem.
Thank you. And the very last question to Balázs. We have seen the Hungarian government's energy policy blocking, for example, wind energy, also for a long time, solar energy. Do you think that the new reality of the energy markets of Europe can force the Hungarian government to change its approach to renewable energy and to rethink Hungarian energy policy, taking into consideration the Paks 2 project, again a new nuclear power plant built by the Russians, or they will continue?
Okay, it's one sentence, but about the nuclear, so I don't want to comment now the Paks 2. It's a very long project, but I'd like to tell about the nuclear that nuclear definitely will not solve the current problem because of the extremely long construction period. So even if something happens in Paks, the result we will see in 2035 or later, seeing the currently running European projects. The Finnish, the French nuclear power plants with over a decade of delay to the planned timing. So that's about the nuclear. So that's why, of course, it's interesting to think about it, but I think on short term this is not an option. About the changing thinking in the government, I see some positive signs. For example, after the election, the Minister of Innovation and Industry, Mr. Palkovic, he was the first who opened this topic again, that whether the wind energies also can be a part of the Hungarian mixture. So I feel something. It's not too much, but something I think happened. And another that I think is also important is now speaking about the reduction of energy usage in the public buildings. Now you know that this heating regulation rules, I remember that in summer, at the beginning of summer, it was a joke that, oh, these stupid Western European countries, they have a regulation about the temperature in the houses, and what to see now, government decree on it. So that's, it have changed. So that's, and so the realism, as you asked me, that this is a new realism. So, and I think also the Hungarian government need to adapt to this new realism, and I think they will, or I am optimistic they will.
Thank you very much. As far as I see, the picture is quite mixed, but there are very positive elements, and on the long run, perhaps this crisis can help us to become more independent from external sources and even to speed up the energy transition, hopefully in a socially just way. Of course, we could continue this discussion for hours, but the time is already up for more than 15 minutes, so we wouldn't like to block the lunch further away. So thank you very much for our panelists to be with us and to share their thoughts on this very timely and very important issue. Thank you very much for all the participants to listen to us. And we are waiting you back at 1:30 for the next panel about cities and the energy crisis.